All right, well, welcome back to another episode of Being Inspired podcast where we're inspiring you to live the abundant life you deserve. We're back with another awesome episode for you. And I just want to start it off by thanking everybody that come on and watch. We up to 9,000 views. I appreciate every single one of you guys that tune in. Just like, share, subscribe, because without you, this won't be possible. So I just want to say thank you. But imagine having like a skin disorder, like eczema or psoriasis or sunburns, and you just tried everything. You tried everything. You tried the pharmacy, you tried the doctor, and nothing ain't working. Well, guess what? Today I have a solution. And this guy is on the line to tell us what the solution is, right? This is the founder of Vibes Natural. He's been doing his thing at home in the Virgin Islands, and he came on here to share his story and give us some tips of how we could take care of our body and our temple because it's a temple. So, Akeem, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, greetings to everyone. Sammy, thanks for having me. I appreciate you. For those of you that don't know, me and Samuel, well, I know him as Sammy. We went to school together. We graduated together from St. Croix Central High in the class of 2008. And, if you told me then that I would be an entrepreneur, I would tell you, I would kind of like laugh and say, okay, all right, whatever. I would just like disregard it. Because when I was in school, I didn't necessarily have a particular plan or goal or like idea as to what I wanted my life to be growing up. I just knew that I wanted to do something that would actually be like impactful for my community in some way. That was one of the few things. And then as well, like music was always a passion of mine. So I like I said, I didn't have a particular plan, but I knew whatever I got, whatever I decided to do, it would have to be something along the lines of those kind of, endeavors. So as I mentioned earlier, I graduated from high school in 2008. I ended up going to the University of the Virgin Islands. And while I was at the university, I took a longer period of time to actually graduate than most of my peers. I started in '08, but I didn't graduate until 2016. Oh, the interesting thing about that, I eventually grew to realize that my time in UVI was ultimately supposed to be like my incubation period. That was the time where I was supposed to meet certain individuals and have certain experiences to kind of open my mind and change my perspective on life or just how things are supposed to work, because when we're in school, we're taught to think, well, okay, you go to school for X amount of years. When you leave school, you go to college and then you go to college for 4 years or whatever. And then after you go to college, you get a job and then you just work your career until you're ready to retire and then live your life. Right. And again, growing up and actually like beginning the whole adulting process, I learned that life isn't so cut and dry, so black and white. You'll have a plan or you'll have an idea as to what it is that you want to do, and then different circumstances will like happen that will kind of like throw your plan for a spin, you know what I mean, or throw a monkey wrench in your plan. And that's basically what happened with me when I was in school, when I was graduating from college. I mean, not college, from high school. My mother at that time was in Iraq. I mean, I had a good relationship with my father. I didn't live with my father. I lived with my mother and my grandmother, like all in one yard. And when my mother was in Iraq, just I went through that whole like process of like figuring out like 12th grade and graduation and what I gonna do for college and applying for college and that kind of stuff. I went through all of that process on my own. I didn't really have anybody like kind of walking through that process with me and helping me to decide what I was going to do. So for me, it was like just go the route of least resistance, which naturally was to go to the University of the Virgin Islands, our university back home in the Virgin Islands. And going into that, I remember having a conversation with an uncle of mine in the States. And my uncle asked me, so what you want to do when you graduate? And I said, well, I was kind of thinking I would like to get into something to do with music. And my grandmother at the time heard that comment and she was like, oh no, music ain't anything that's certain or for sure. You need to find something that gonna make you money. So going into it, I decided, well, okay, well, if that's the case, then I'm gonna go into computer science, right? Because at the time, I had like kind of playing with computers and stuff like that. Even that was all part of like God's plan in some regards, because as I started the university, I started off as a computer science major. And yeah, like I said, I was just going through the motions. So my first year, I basically knock out most of my basic courses. And by my sophomore year, I was able to start like some major courses. But then, in doing that, starting like my major computer programming courses, I realized that really wasn't for me. That was like the first time that I was literally struggling like to pass a course. And it wasn't so much that I was unable to like grasp the material. Honestly, I just wasn't as interested enough to motivate to devote my time and energy to fully understanding it. Right.
Right.
So and then the classes weren't necessarily, or the professor wasn't necessarily the most I would say the most effective in conveying the process or teaching the process. It was kind of like you just sit down and watch him program, and then you try and emulate what he does, as opposed to like, breaking down the stuff step by step and stuff like that. And maybe that's just me looking for somebody to hold my hand, as opposed to me trying to apply myself. I don't know. But wherever the case may have been, I realized that that really wasn't the route for me, you know?
Right.
So then now this kind of put me in quite a bit of a quandary, because, just coming out of high school, I making my first like choosing your major is kind of like in college, I guess you could say would be like your first major adult decision that you make.
Mm-hmm.
And I make this decision to go into computer science, and at the end of the day it turned out to be not like ideal. So I feel like I already botched my first adult decision. So but like I said, all of that was why I learn now in hindsight, all of that was really part of God's plan. Because while I in my like my I guess you could say like my second semester of college, I signed up to be like a student worker, and because my major was computer science, they put me to work in IT. And I kind of befriended my supervisors, and those individuals really served as like support system, friends, and even to some degree became like family and like mentors for me, to kind of help me to realize that I was more capable than I might have really thought I was. I mean, I already knew that I was like intelligent and stuff like that, but I never really like applied like thought about just how much I could really apply myself to so many different things, and meeting some of the guys there, a guy named Durval Prince, for example, he was really like one person who opened my eyes to like a lot of the things that I was actually capable of doing, or kind of like in kind of walk me into just trying different things, as opposed to just like saying, well, oh well, I don't know anything about this.
Right.
He kind of like say for instance, right? And give a quick little side story, and then go back to the main story. So we had a time that him and I was going to install a deck in my vehicle. And I grew up all the time whenever like a deck need to be installed, or any kind of like work like that need to be done, my father would always like hire somebody to do it. He would like go to a guy at the electronics store and have them install it for him. So having a conversation with Dorval one time, he was like, "Oh well, we could try this ourselves." You know. So I ended up going by another co me and him ended up meeting by another co-worker's house, and we went through the process of like breaking down and installing the deck, taking out the old deck and installing the new deck together. And it made me realize like, these things well, he himself, I remember him saying like, you have people who don't have any kind of college education who are able to do these things. We who are two college educated individuals, it's not rocket science. We should be able to do it just the same. It just requires a little bit of application, and that statement alone really opened my mind to just how much we are really capable of and how much we limit ourselves in our own capabilities, right? Because ultimately, like I said, like set a good example. Today I just repaired a laundry machine for my mother, right? I didn't go to school for anything like that, but I mean, YouTube was there. I was able to, like, once she tell me what the problem was, I observed the problem for myself. I described the problem on on Google or whatever. I found a YouTube video and YouTube basically walked me through the process. And I mean, granted, watching a video and doing the work is two very different things. But at the end of the day, as long as you have the willingness to apply yourself and to figure it out, you know, it's not that complicated. So just from that one instance with Durval, right? Installing a deck. Now I eventually came to a point where now I do my own mechanic work to some extent. And like I said, I've like opened up a TV before to repair a TV. I could fix laptops. I mean, you name it, if there's a problem, as long as I could diagnose the problem and I could find something to guide me through it, I would do that before I go to pay somebody to do it. Not saying that if I have the resources, I wouldn't pay for it. But I mean, at the same time, if I'm capable of doing it, then why not challenge myself and see just how much I could do? But to bring it all back full circle, me being in UVI and going into computer science, even though it turned out to not be the major for me, it put me in a position where I was able to meet somebody who would have a profound influence on my life that even like follows me or is stays with me up until literally this
Yeah.
exact day, you know? So but like I say, me being in UVI, even though it may have taken me a longer period of time to graduate than other people it may have taken some of my classmates or my peers, I really don't regret my time there because I had a lot of significant experiences and like encounters with individuals that really shaped me into the person that I am today. So even to bring it forward to talking about my business. So while I was working at UVI, I actually met a professor. I befriended a professor named Mr. Prosper. He was like a speech and philosophy professor, and or public speaking and philosophy. And I never actually had his class, but he would just see me lingering around the school or around the university, I guess, in times when I didn't really have anything to do. And one day he just made conversation with me, and we just kind of clicked. Eventually we develop a relationship where, so the university, like I said, I was working for IT, but
Yeah.
IT was integrated with the library. So the technicians would work out of the library at the university. So even when, we didn't have like IT work to do, then sometimes we were required to like man the front desk where students would come to like check out books and stuff of that nature. So, in times where like I would be at the desk, Mr. Prosper would come and talk to me, and me and him would be there maybe from like, if say the library closes at 9 o'clock, we would be there from like 6:30, 7 o'clock till literally 9 o'clock. Probably sometimes people would leave us in the parking lot having conversation, But that same guy, there was a time, there came a point in my life where I don't know, I may have stumbled across a video or may have read an article or something that was basically saying that deodorants, a lot of aluminum based deodorants have been found to be like tied to breast cancer or different forms of cancer in both men and women. And me seeing that, I've always been somebody who aimed to be a little bit more health conscious. And me seeing that, I decided that I would experiment and try to make my own deodorant. So even now, this ties back to the experience that I had with Durval,
Right.
where nobody ever showed me how to make deodorant before, but I just had a random idea. And because of that experience I had with Durval, where now I realized that I'm capable of doing a lot of different things, I decided I was comfortable with when the idea of trying to create my own deodorant popped up in my head. I was comfortable with the idea of actually going through the process of experimenting to create my own deodorant. So it's still, like I said, those experiences still influencing me from then throughout my life. But when I started experimenting with making my own deodorant, I had that conversation with Mr. Prosper eventually. And he was like, "Oh well, if you're going to experiment with like making natural deodorants or whatever, then you should try something with shea butter." And he bought me a pound of shea butter, and he said, "Here, go home and do some experimentation or try something." And I did a little research and I started experimenting, and I came up with an initial product. And but I wasn't doing it with intentions of like selling it or starting a business or anything. I just was doing it again just for the heck of it, just for experiment's sake, see if I could probably create something that would be beneficial to me. And like I said, I came up with something where I mixed basically like a lotion that I had from before with the shea butter. And a friend of mine tried it. Some friends of mine tried it, and they were like, "Oh, wow, this really feel nice, man. This look nice. This feel nice. This smell nice. You should probably try selling this." Okay, well, maybe I should consider pursuing this as a potential business opportunity. Now, mind you, all then my degree was in education, and my degree is in secondary education and social sciences, right? But I had no experience in like business. So to even think about starting my own business was like so far from my mind. But like I said, I met someone. They put the idea in my head. But again, the initial product that I make, it was a blend with like a pre-made product. So I didn't want to make a product that was based on another like product. So I started doing more research on like body butters and how I could make my own body butter. Now, what I will say is that the product that I made initially in 2017 is very different from what I have now. And over time, as I did it more and more and more, my process evolved from whether I'm doing it by hand to then using certain like machinery to make the process a lot easier, or cut the time in half and those kind of things. All of those things actually like cause my process or my development process to evolve. Till now, I have a product that's even more appealing and attractive than it was at that time. I think between 2018 and 2019, I started getting my stuff in like couple stores around the island. I think I had like one or two stores that was carrying my products. And then by 2020, I started working for the National Park Service. So in 2017, I created the prototype, I guess you could say, of my product, God Butter. And I started like, setting the foundation for what will become Vibes Natural Products.
So
But
real quick,
uh-huh.
what make you name it God Butter? How did you come up with that?
Well, ultimately, I really can't take credit for that. It was a girl I was dating at the time, and
Okay.
she was kind of like an eccentric individual, and she came up with the name. She just threw out the name, and I was like, this song kind of is song a bit pretentious, but at the same time is like something that definitely gonna catch your eyes and catch your ears, make a lot of people curious. So I was like, hey, why not? Let's roll with it. And what I would say is I find that it actually has been doing the work of God, because a lot of people have actually found that they experience significant healing using my products, and it actually has done, provided healing for people who use it even outside of what I intended for it to do, you know so initially, when I made the product, it was ultimately just to keep your skin moisturized. But people have found that it has helped them to like heal scars that been, or clear scars on the skin that been on the skin for years. People who got burned like yesterday, by a week later, the burn was healed and there was no scarring. And people who had knee surgery, they have very minimal scarring as they were applying the butter throughout the healing process. People who had significant eczema actually had the eczema flare ups like diminish, almost like till it's non-existent. And I mean, even had people like experience pain relief using some of my products. And I mean, even from making God butter, I was then able to branch off into making other products like body oils and pain relief oils and stuff like that. And again, all of that kind of stem ultimately from those experiences that I had with the different individuals that I met throughout my life while I was in the University of the Virgin Islands longer than I thought I should have been. You know what I mean?
Hey, it's your journey, man.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has their own journey. For me, shoot, I've been in college for 5 years too. Not similar to you
Mm-hmm.
because I had a major of marine biology, but biology wasn't my thing. Science wasn't my thing. So when I got to college, I was just like, wow, this ain't it enough. This ain't it.
Mm-hmm.
So similar to you, everybody just have their own journey. You have to figure out your own path, and
Mm-hmm.
forge your own path. Is
Mm-hmm.
no like for example, my sister just graduated yesterday, so Friday. Friday she graduated, but she been in school since 2019. She's a single mom. She's dealing with her daughter. Like you have to go through your own journey. So
Mm-hmm.
hey, whatever it takes to get to the goal. That's why I look at
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and I think a major thing a major lesson that I'm learning right now is that sometimes you just have to be willing to humble yourself, because sometimes we have so much pride in certain things that we don't want to do certain things because it may go against maybe our image or like, the perception that other people may have of us. And ultimately, it shouldn't really matter because if those things that go against those perceptions are going to get you to your goal, what's more important, maintaining that perception or accomplishing your goal? You know what I mean? And sometimes we have to be able to humble ourselves in order to accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish. So yeah.
So, like, since making God butter, what are some ways that you decided to market yourself? Because I know it didn't blow up overnight and it was just kind of word of mouth. How were you able to get into stores and stuff like that?
Well, ultimately, it was just doing the groundwork, doing the footwork, really. Once I started making the product, then, like I said, I had people who were using the product and actually, like, I was getting like positive reviews from some of my customers, some of my friends and family. And some people were telling me, oh, yeah, you should consider putting this in couple stores and stuff like that. Now, again, I didn't have anybody guiding me as to how this whole process goes. So the only thing that I could do was actually go to a store and ask them and see. And fortunately for me, the first store that I went to, they were just opening and they were into like selling like natural products, especially like local products to like tourists visiting the island or the territory. So when I went to them, they were like, yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, for sure, let's do it. But then again with challenges, there were challenges like in throughout that experience, there were challenges that I would experience eventually that I would have to like eventually address. But yeah, once I put it in that store at one point, I was like dropping off like 50 to 60 bottles every 2 weeks at that store because they were like very aggressive in marketing it and like pushing it. And eventually I realized that, even I was selling it to them for a certain price and they were like kind of tripling the price that they were selling, or like quadrupling the price that they were selling it for in exchange. And it made me realize the value of what I had. And at the same time, it made me realize that like in business, you can't be afraid to be like disagreeable, and you can't be afraid to like make certain decisions that other people might not necessarily agree with. Because at the end of the day, people gonna make decisions that you might not agree with, but that's the best decision that they need to make for themselves and their business. So you have to do the same. You have to be willing to do the same. And sometimes that might mean taking a loss in certain areas to take a win in the long run, you know?
Yeah.
So like I said, eventually that I had that one store and then I started to branch off to other stores. But even in having those other stores, that wasn't necessarily like sufficient in terms of like making the business sustainable for myself and for the business itself. So, but all at that time, I was still working a full-time job. By then I had left UVI as a full-time employee to then start working at Channel 12, the local radio station, Virgin Islands Public Broadcasting Station. And while I was working there, I was a traffic coordinator. As a traffic coordinator, my job was to program the channel, basically. Particularly, I used to program commercials, whereas my supervisor would program the actual shows that would air. I would program the commercials, she would program the shows. And it was a sedentary job where I was just sitting at a desk all day behind a computer, clicking, and I'm not that kind of individual. I'm a person that have a lot of interests and a lot of talents. During that time, I had actually went to South Africa. And while I was in South Africa, was it no, I lie. This was before I started working a job, but either way, not too long before that, I had went to South Africa and I did a tarot reading with a lady, and she herself told me that I should start studying tarot. Now I didn't express any interest in that to her at that time, but she told me. But around that time, I actually was just recently being introduced to like the whole concept of tarot. And there was a lot of synchronicities around that moment that made it significant for me and made me feel like, well, it's something that I should actually consider, pursuing. So while I was working at Channel 12, even though the job that I had wasn't very fulfilling for me, it was a job that didn't require a whole lot of like mental capacity. So I was able to do the job and still focus on like learning and understanding different aspects of tarot and astrology. So then I became basically like a tarot reader and an astrologer to some degree. You know what I mean? But I was able to kind of still maximize my time in some ways. So that's another thing that I had that I was able to kind of, or another skill that I was able to like kind of add under my belt to learn on my own. And again, this goes right back to experiences with UVI, meeting different people who just show me that I'm capable of doing more than I might have thought initially. But while I was working at Channel 12, I had already known that I wasn't fulfilled at that job and I wanted to work for myself. But I wasn't completely comfortable working with the idea of like leaving a full-time permanent job with a steady paycheck to then, try and make money on my own. Yeah. By the time eventually around not too long after I started working at Channel 12, the National Park Service had reached out to me and tell me when there was a job opening because years prior in like 2015, 2016, I was a park guide. I mean, not a park guide, sorry. I was an intern for the National Park Service. So, they had been working and trying to find ways to get me to work with them full time. And around 2020, 19 into 2020, that's when they had they had came up with like an opportunity or found a way to get me into the Park Service. So I left Channel 12 and I started working at the Park Service in 2020. Now to bring it back to where you were asking me initially with how I got my product or my brand to be where it is now. While I was working at the Park Service, this was at the height of COVID. And eventually they had put a mandate on the federal employees that federal employees had to get vaccinated. Now, I personally wasn't comfortable with the idea of getting vaccinated. And, they basically told us, well, it's either you're going to get vaccinated or you're going to get fired, you know? Um, I wasn't it wasn't like so cut and dry because there was a period of time that you had, and then there were certain things that you could do, to kind of like stave off the firing or whatever, or the vaccination. But the long and short is, at that point, I made the decision that I was going to do what I have to do to figure out how to make my business more sustainable. And this was October of 2021. November of 2021, I became a vendor for the cruise ship industry here. That had just recently, because at that time, cruise ships weren't really doing well. A lot of ports had closed down because they didn't want large ships and planes of people from the States coming and bringing COVID to the island.
Yeah.
But our governor decided that he was going to leave our ports open, and as a result of that, St. Croix became more of a tourist destination, leading to more cruise ships at St. Croix. As a result of that, that was an opportunity for me now to get into the cruise ship industry. So I became a cruise ship vendor. in 2021, in November of 2021, and then by December of 2021, I was also a vendor at the local market. Now, in addition to doing those two things, which were ultimately like weekly things where I would be able to make like weekly sales for my business and help and kind of like make people become more familiar with my brand. Any event that popped up, whether it was like, we and St. Croix, we fortunate that we have like a number of community events where vendors could come out and sell their stuff. I mean, we have Jump Up, which is like a black party in Christiansted. Then we have Mango Mele, which is another kind of cultural community event. We're highlighting everything related to mango. We have the Coconut
Mention
Fest.
all the extra holidays that we get.
Exactly, you know? So, I mean, because of all of these different activities, I started like vending at all of these different activities. So sometimes twice a month, I different locations where there are major traffic flows of people passing through. So then I sell in my product constantly to different people, different places. Eventually, people became familiar with my product because now you might buy it and you might buy it for your girlfriend. Your girlfriend uses it and then she realizes how well it works for her. She then tells her mother about it and her mother now wants to try it. Then her mother buy it for her other siblings or her friends at work and stuff like that. It just ultimately spread like wildfire. But really and truly, what made it to the point that it's like a household brand now and in the Virgin Islands or at least in St. Croix is just doing that footwork of constantly going out there, making my presence known, making and kind of like helping people to become familiar with my product. That really led to my product being able to be what it is now, where I am actually able to sustain myself primarily off of my products alone. And I won't like say that, I'm making millions of dollars, but what I will say is that just as much money as I was making working for other people, I'm making now, and I ain't working nearly as much or as frequently as hard as I was working then. So I mean, this just kind of goes to show that like we all have like marketable skills and abilities, and we just have to have confidence in what we do and just find ways to put it out there because they're guaranteed going to be people out there that's willing to support what it is that you're doing. You just have to make it known so that they could find you and come support you.
Yeah. I think where we get stuck with the most is just like we get caught up in the job and not think about what else can we do besides the
Mm-hmm.
job.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where most people get stuck on their journey because we're all equipped with some kind of gift, some type of talent that would help you benefit you to be fruitful and multiply.
Unfortunately, that's not so much the fault of people. That's more the fault of society because society has like conditioned people to be more gears in a wheel than to be their own. I mean, gears in a machine than to be their own machine. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They condition you to think that it's more profitable and more beneficial to you to help somebody else to get rich as opposed to you directing your own energy to making a system that would allow you to make your own, generate your own wealth, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're working for a multi-million dollar company, there's a cap to just how much you could make from that company. Because ultimately, I mean, certain companies, depending on the position that you're working, you may make enough money that you're able to generate some form of wealth, right? But in creating your own business, there really is no limit to just how high or how profitable your business could be, as long as you're in the right field and you have the right approach to market your stuff and get it into the hands of millions of people. Once you figure out that formula, there's no limit to how successful and how wealthy you could grow from your own business venture, but it doesn't serve the world to have a million entrepreneurs and business owners. Somebody has to do the grunt work. So it's more beneficial to have a few business owners and entrepreneurs and to have the majority of the folks conditioned or thought to be like that they have to be like factory workers or like laborers, as opposed to like allowing other people to dream. And don't get me wrong, not everybody is meant to be like an entrepreneur or a business owner. Not everyone is cut out for that. But I mean, a lot more people are cut out for it than they really realize. Because, like I tell you,
Yeah.
when I was in school, if you told me that I was going to be an entrepreneur, I wouldn't believe nobody, because I wouldn't believe that person, because I mean, that was like the furthest thing from my mind. Like I tell you, my passion at that time was music. So I would have if I had to choose, music was the route that I would have went. I mean, eventually, even in music, I think eventually I would have still end up under like the business path in some regards. But here it is, I'm actually like a full-time business owner where I'm making money based on my own hands, my own effort, my own time, without having to like, punch a clock or report to anyone else. And there's a certain level of like fulfillment that comes with that, but there's also a greater level of responsibility that comes with that. So that's why I say some people are cut out for it and some others aren't.
That's 100% because the discipline part is the main key. If you ain't disciplined to wake up in the morning, carry your own self, basically leading your own self to do what you need to do, then you ain't gonna be successful. I mean, it's gonna get hard some days, but you still have to do it no matter what, because at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, it's not on you. If you don't show up, you ain't getting paid. You ain't eating that day.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's real. So, what is some advice that you will give somebody that looking to start their entrepreneurial journey?
I could advise someone to do. One of the things I would say for sure, make sure whatever you're getting into, you're passionate about or you have a significant interest in. Whether it's you're interested in in the money that you're going to make from it, or you're actually interested in the craft itself and how good, I mean, it's like a hobby of yours. You have to have some kind of like interest or passion about that specific business. Because when the times get hard, when you have the challenges, if you're not passionate about it, it'll be easy for you to like kind of toss it to the side, you know? So definitely you want to make sure, especially if, I mean, at least if you want the business to be sustainable and have some kind of longevity, you have to have the interest so that you would be able to like maintain the motivation to stick with it when times get hard. That's one thing. Another thing, don't be so caught up in like establishing a business plan. A business plan is important and it's helpful, but it's not necessarily essential to getting started. You have, like, say for instance, if you have money, resources, then yeah, a business plan is essential because then you're able to structure yourself accordingly. Right. But then if you have like a business idea and you have to start from grassroots and you don't necessarily have any resources, then all you could do is start where you are. Right. And unfortunately, sometimes we get so caught up in like analysis paralysis from like the business planning aspect of the business that we never actually get started with the business. Sometimes you have to be in the business to know the challenges and the struggles that you face, like you would face and experience, so that you could then know how to properly plan moving forward. Some experiences, I mean, some challenges you don't really experience until you're in that position and you're doing the work. You know, so so those would be like two of the main things I would say. Make sure you're passionate about it and just get started. Don't hold yourself up trying to like wait for perfection or for to have like everything in order. Just get the ball rolling and figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, because that's a fact. Because if you wait till you're perfect, people ain't gonna connect with you
Hmm.
because you're a perfect product already. People need people to connect with, or entrepreneurs that it could connect with. They could see you growing from this portion of your life, you just starting out. Now they seeing, oh, okay, now he has more products. Now he's doing much better. But if you're starting out and you have everything together, it's much harder to connect with
Yeah,
because they can't see how you got there so fast, you know?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Another
that's
thing. Another thing I would say for sure, don't be afraid to say I don't know, and don't be afraid to like seek assistance, because no man is an island and you can't do everything on your own. I have a friend that once told me like, your value is determined by the amount of value you could bring to others, right? So if you really think about it, millionaires aren't millionaires by themselves, right? Those people ultimately employ other people who help them to achieve those financial goals, right? Every millionaire they may have like a secretary, they may have like an accountant, or they may have like a marketing person. They have different people in their corner that helps them to accomplish whatever goals that they set for themselves. And in those people helping you to accomplish your goal, you're achieving more value, you're acquiring more value for your life, but you're also bringing value to that individual's life, because now they're working to help you increase your value, but they're getting value by getting experience, but also getting the monetary compensation that you're giving them from in exchange for their assistance. Is there's a direct correlation between your level of value and the value that you're able to bring to others. So don't feel like you kind of have to keep others down in order, or you have to keep everything for yourself in order for your value to increase. The more you're willing to share with others and the more you're willing to pour into others, the more your value is naturally going to increase by virtue of like them pouring into you and your businesses, or just by virtue of, you doing like kind deeds and then they're coming back to you in one way or the other. But you have to be willing to like share that wealth in order to gain more wealth.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And then we got a few more questions before we get off. Uh, but one of the questions I got for you is, what made you start getting those thought provoking posts on your Facebook? Like, I think one was like, what if imagine we had a place, or we give business owners a $200 gas card. And then there was another one where, imagine if we had a place that entrepreneurs could like batch process their products. Like, how did you come up with that idea? Because it's very thought provoking, and it made me think like, wow, we could do so much more, you know?
Well, okay, so like I tell you as well, when I was in school, I didn't know what I wanted to do, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, but I always knew that two other things I was interested in was music and making an impact in my community, right? And in recent months or recent weeks, one of the senators, or former senator, posted something stating that, like, Virgin Islanders who are abroad, we need you to come back home so that we could build build up the Virgin Islands, because we can't do it on our own. We have to work together, basically.
Yeah.
And that sparked a lot of debate and controversy, because you have a lot of Virgin Islanders abroad who live in the States and are living way more comfortably than they would be able to live if they were back home, right? And I felt like, two things can, I mean, this is another thing that a lot of people were saying, that two things can be true. Yes, we do. The Virgin Islands is in a bad state, and we do need the expertise of our Virgin Islanders who are abroad to help us to build. But you also have to have the infrastructure to kind of welcome those individuals back, because cost of living is ridiculous. There aren't a lot of jobs that are able to like meet the needs of those individuals. And then like affordable homes are not necessarily the most available. So in acknowledging the truth that we do need Virgin Islanders to be more involved, those who are present and those who are abroad, and in acknowledging that we do need them to be more involved in the development of the Virgin Islands, I also had to acknowledge that those problems and those difficulties also exist as well. So then, in trying to like come up with a solution or like answers to some of those things, I just said, well, all we could do is just try to do the little bit that we can as individuals. And then I just started to like think about different things that like we could do as individuals to make life in the Virgin Islands better, little by little. And then eventually I started kind of like this imagine campaign where I would say like, imagine if we had, all our schools were to teach financial literacy, because I mean that's something that's a reality, or a subject that we definitely lack in school. And most of us never really gain, even into like our late adulthood, 50s and 60s, we're not really financially literate. How many of our parents still in situations where they're struggling to pay off certain loans and debts and can't even afford a home, only because they weren't financially literate as to how to handle their financial resources. You know what I mean? But that was one thing. And then, eventually branch off from doing good things in the community to help the community to grow, to then thinking about ways that we can make life easier for Virgin Islanders and easier for businesses in the Virgin Islands. And that's how I came up with that one in particular, with the gas coupons. Because I mean, you have some businesses that have to run up and down all day, from plumbers who have to do house calls
Yeah.
to like certain people who doing deliveries. But even though they're doing all of these, they're taking these actions, which making money for them, which is ultimately turning into like taxes for the government. What they're really getting in return, because then they still have to then take that money that they're making and invest it back into like cost of living or just sustaining their business. So if now we had a system that allowed like, or would develop ways to make it easier for a business to sustain itself, then we would have more businesses in the Virgin Islands. Because like, okay, so you remember when we were growing up, Sonia's used to be full of stores. Right now, if you drive through Sonia's barely have any stores, right? And part of the reason why is because like just the cost of like electricity is so ridiculous. You know what I mean? And even though cost of electricity is so ridiculous, we don't have any systems to kind of like support these businesses, to help them to sustain, right?
Yeah.
Because they have to pay rent, they have to pay cost of electricity, they have to pay cost of water, and then they still have to maintain their inventory, and they have to maintain their staff, and then now if everybody's struggling financially in the Virgin Islands, then, or in St. Croix in particular, then those people aren't necessarily going to patronize those businesses. So then it makes it even more difficult for then those businesses to continue to sustain. So at least if we could find ways to make it a little bit easier for those businesses to sustain, then they could probably redirect some of those funds to then improve in different aspects of their business, to then hopefully lead to more sales or more businesses. I mean, like to more business for their business, which gonna help their
Yeah.
business to generate more funds and grow. Right. But ultimately, based on where we are right now, we can expect that like businesses are going to be able to sustain themselves. Because if people living in the Virgin Islands are having a hard time just sustaining their own household, we can't necessarily expect that business would be able to do so without some kind of assistance. Businesses would need assistance to sustain themselves as well. So again, for me, it was just really like the whole idea was meant to like encourage people to think about like a better Virgin Islands and what exactly that would look like, right? And like say even for instance, and unfortunately, we had like I had some things that I said or posts that I made generated some kind of like negative feedback in some regards. Because like say for instance, what I made one where I said that like, imagine if local artists had a place to record music for free, right? And people automatically went to the negative with that, where they were thinking, okay, well, that mean an engineer gonna be recording, gonna be sacrificing their time. A musical engineer gonna probably be volunteering their time and the energy, or they probably like using up WAPA to help people, or the power, using up power and electricity to help people to record music for free. All of these different things, but the goal was just to get people to think or imagine what that would actually look like, what a
Yeah.
system would look like. Is there subsidies that could probably be devoted to something like that, where an engineer could actually be paid to record for people for free? But then if they want the music mix and mastered or perfected, if they want the rights to the music and stuff like that, they would have to pay for that. You know what I mean? It wasn't really to have that and for that to be the answer, but just to put us in a mindset where we're able to think about ways to possibly get to that reality, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I may see the six on the screen and you may see a nine. But
Mm,
if we try to see each other's perspective, we can be able to build more and get more out of the conversation. Because essentially, you're starting a conversation then. Yeah, you
mhm.
may be negative, but the negative could turn into a positive, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So, my final question for you is like, where would you see yourself in the next 5 years?
That's a very interesting question because that's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Because I've been kind of like going with the flow and figuring life out as I go along. And I find that I've made progress, but I find that I've hit a lot of like roadblocks along the way of progress as well, which is natural. But, to answer your question, I really don't know. If I'm being honest, I know where my business is. I am at a place where I can't necessarily stop making product because I have people who live by my products now, right? So my goal is to figure out how well, hopefully 5 years from now, the goal would be to have a system in place where I'm able to mass produce my products without jeopardizing the quality and the integrity of my products, but also where I don't necessarily have to be as directly involved in the production and sale of my products, right? Because I mean, as much as I love what I do and I love making a difference in people's lives with my products, I know to myself it's not sustainable for me to think like I gonna be up until 3 in the morning when I'm 50 years old still making products and like lifting boxes and bins when I'm 60 years old to go out and sell. So the goal for my business would be to actually figure out how I could make the business self-sustainable, excluding my direct involvement. So that would be part of like my 5 year ambition. Aside from that, figuring out how I could be more impactful in my community. The most effective way to be more impactful in my community. I mean, a lot of people have been like, planting the seed in my mind of like running for office or something at some point in time. And I mean, if I'm being honest with you, I think that's something I'm going to do eventually at some point in my life. But before I commit myself to that, I have to like structure my life and my business before I put myself in that position. One. And then aside from that, I have certain things I want to like accomplish as well for myself. Like I tell you, music is something that I've always been passionate about. I'm a singer and a songwriter. So I mean, I would like at some point in my life before I commit myself to any kind of significant venture like running for office or anything like that, I would like to have one experience where I create my own and have it out there and see how people respond to my creative endeavor. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, when I made God Butter, I didn't make it with intentions of it becoming what it became, and it turned out to be like a very successful, well received product. And it just I mean I remember when I first started, I was very apprehensive about selling my product. I wasn't sure if like it would be worth whatever price I was selling it for. I wasn't sure if it would be well received and if people would actually love it and want to continue to purchase it. And even though I had those apprehensions, I still moved forward with it and look at the result. So, I feel like there's the same potential when it comes to like music. And I would want to like have that experience of knowing I tried and seeing how it played out rather than to have it in the back of my mind like, wow, I wonder what it would have been like if I actually did it. I wonder if I could have been successful, if that would have been beneficial or profitable for me. And honestly, I don't aspire to be like a superstar or anything like that, but I would like to have that experience of creating a song or a record that's well received and have the experience of performing on I won't say a big stage, but a decent stage with a good crowd and having
Right.
them sing my song, that kind of way. That's one experience I always like aspire to have. So I mean, so to answer your question, I don't really have a exact goal, a 5 year plan, but I have an idea of what I would want the next 5 years to look like for me. And I'm gonna just take the small steps that I can along the way to hopefully accomplish those goals. And but ultimately my main goal would be to, like I said, sustain my business and to make as
Yes.
much of an impact in my community as I can.
All right. Akeem, if somebody wanted to connect with you and get your products, where can they connect with you at?
Well, right now I'm working on my website. Hopefully I could get that done sometime in the near future. But for right now, they could always connect with me on Facebook at Vibes Natural 340 or Vibes Natural as well on Instagram as well. And yeah, they could email me. My email is vibesnatural@gmail.com. And I mean, would it be like advisable for me to put my number, to mention my number as well? Or yeah,
Yeah.
let's just leave it at email
Yeah.
and Facebook and Instagram. And if you're really serious, then we could talk phone numbers when you reach out to me on those avenues.
Yeah, I could
Uh,
link it up under the video.
yeah, so I mean, those would be the best ways to communicate or to interact with me, or get in touch with me for the time being, at least until I'm able to get my website open. But I mean, up and running. But just to add before I go, another thing I would say. One last bit of information. Never doubt that the path that you're going is the path that you're meant to be on, right? And even when things don't seem to be going your way, trust that it's actually a blessing in disguise. And the reason why I say that is because, while I was working at the park service, like I said, I wanted to leave my job for a very long time, but I didn't have the faith and confidence in myself. And I did the ag fair every year. For those of you who don't know, in St. Croix, we have what they call the agriculture fair every year around February. And that's like one of the largest agriculture fairs in the Caribbean. Where you have people from all over the Caribbean and all over the world who come to sell their products at our agriculture fair. But in May of 2022 was the first time I did the agriculture fair selling my products, and I made 2 months salary in 3 days. And that motivated me to leave my job. Now, what was interesting about that is earlier that year, I had agreed to become part of a government committee, right? And this was in February that I had agreed to become part of the committee. I didn't submit my resignation from my job until June 1st of 2022. And the day I submitted my resignation was the day that the person or the representative of the committee reached out to me and told me they're ready to get things going with that committee. So my last day on the job, the day after, was my first meeting for that committee. Now, the committee really was irrelevant, right? But being on the committee, I made connections with a particular individual. As a result of connecting with that individual, as a result of being on the committee and connecting with that individual, I was able to go to New York last year for a trade show to display my products in a trade show up there. And then in July this year, I'll be going to Trinidad to the largest Caribbean trade show. That is the largest trade show in the Caribbean, to display my products and hopefully to make contact with different business owners throughout the Caribbean and probably export my products to different islands. So I say that to say, like, we go through our struggles and our challenges and our difficulties, but sometimes those challenges and difficulties are meant to put you in the right place so that you're able to meet the right people or be in the right circle, experience the right like challenges to kind of put things in perspective and just make things happen for you. Right. So, like I said, even with me being in UVI for a longer period of time, I was able to meet certain individuals and have certain experiences that ultimately influenced me to this day. Leaving my job, even outside of like the challenges that would follow, I would still meet certain individuals that allow me to then have greater experiences that would allow me to allow my business to progress. Right. So there were a lot of bumps along the way, whether we're talking about falling out with the committee, having arguments and disagreements with the committee, or even having financial difficulties or feeling stressed and frustrated. But even throughout all of that, I still was put in the right places at the right time to meet with certain individuals so that I'm able to progress myself and my business. So the one thing I would just say is just live your life and just trust that you're being guided down the path that you're meant to walk. And everything will make sense sooner rather than later. But you just have to trust the process. Trust the process and keep the faith and stay positive.
Thank you for that last minute thought because that was my last question. Any last minute thoughts
Well,
you had?
there we go.
So we connected, we're on the same page.
That's a good thing. Great minds, man.
So, everyone, I want to thank you for coming on to the Inspired podcast, where we're inspiring you to live the abundant life you deserve. I want to thank Akeem and I want to thank everyone that tuned into this episode. Go ahead and like, share, and comment and subscribe. All right. So, until next time, we'll see you again. Peace out.
All right. Thanks for having me.